Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to show you all what I've been doing this season to boost my FPS. I have a pretty beefy PC, but I still manage to consistently get more than 240 FPS while playing and streaming. You guys probably know this already, but the more FPS you have, the smoother your game will be, the less input lag you'll have, and the better your game will feel overall. What's nice about the tips and tricks I'm about to cover are that a lot of them are applicable to both PC and console. Console is capped at 60 FPS, but there's a good chance that a lot of you guys aren't getting anywhere near that. Nothing that I use to boost my FPS involves weird or sketchy downloads with programs that end up hurting your PC's performance. We don't do that around here. Everything I use is legitimate through either your Windows settings on PC or through your Fortnite in-game settings for both PC and console. I'll throw some timestamps on the screen now for each different method or collection of methods, so if you're interested in only the console ones, you could skip straight to those. With that being said, let's start with one of the most useful new settings to boost your FPS that was added in Season 9. In my last FPS improvement video, I focused a lot on this really intricate and honestly just confusing trick called the Snuffy Method. This was when the whole Deady Zero FPS boost craze was going on and every pro player was bragging on Twitter about how their PCs were getting like 800 FPS. Then this guy named Snuffy came out and released a whole guide on how to get smoother gameplay on multi-threaded CPUs. I talked about it a lot more in depth in that video, but basically Fortnite doesn't benefit with having a whole lot of threads. What this means is that people with decent CPUs, which have more cores and can run more processes at a time, were getting worse performance because their CPU was not being utilized to its full extent. The obvious fix is to enable those cores that weren't being used, and that would help out. But of course, because Fortnite is Fortnite, the anti-cheat system blocks any modifications you make. What Snuffy found was that you could set what cores you want to run before Fortnite launches, and then if you make a shortcut in your desktop, you could just launch Fortnite through that and get much better FPS. Fortnite must have seen this and kind of realized, hey, maybe we should enable this ourselves, and that's what they tried to do by adding this new multi-threaded optimization setting all the way at the bottom of your first settings page under the graphics settings. When I hover over it, it reads, Multithreaded Rendering splits drawing work across multiple threads which can dramatically improve performance on multi-core processors. However, this can cause hitches and lower FPS on weaker hardware. So this sounds a lot like Snuffy's method, and it is very similar, but it's not the same. The way this setting works is it enables every single thread to split the load on your CPU evenly. Snuffy's method was designed specifically to only enable certain threads and leave other threads disabled in order to optimize your CPU usage. My recommendation is to turn multi-threaded rendering on if you have the option. You should be able to tell right away if it's hurting or helping your FPS. If you notice that your game starts skipping frames and you're getting micro stutters, then turn it off. But if you don't notice too big of a difference, then just leave it on. I noticed about a 10 FPS difference in that with multi-threaded rendering off, my FPS fluctuated more than with it on. There may be some of you guys who don't even have this option. The reason for that is in its name. It's for CPUs with multiple cores. You can check how many cores your processor has by opening up your task manager, then going to performance and CPU. On the right, you should see cores, and then it will tell you how many you have. If it's less than 4, then that's why you don't have the multi-threaded option enabled. You can also check all the processes and threads going on, as well as the total CPU utilization when you're playing Fortnite. It should be higher with the setting enabled, so you can compare your utilization before and after to make sure. Overall though, most of you guys should be fine and see a decent improvement in your FPS with the option enabled. If your PC has multiple cores but maybe isn't the best, then you can turn it off and see if that's better. The reason that would work is because the setting might overwork your CPU, so it may run better without all of them enabled. I'm not going to cover Snuffy's method again. You can technically do Snuffy's method and then turn this option on. The most important thing is just to turn the multi-threaded rendering setting on and off and to see which improves your FPS the most. The next way you can really improve your FPS is something that we all used to do that has slowly come back, which is playing on stretched resolutions. Back in the day, the main benefit for playing on stretched was the vertical FOV you gained and how smooth it made your game feel. Part of the reason it felt so smooth was because of the lower resolution that you played on. A resolution like 1600 by 1080, those numbers are just the amount of horizontal and vertical pixels on your screen. If you multiply them together, you get the total amount of pixels that you'll see on your screen. That means the more stretched your game is, the less pixels will be on your screen, the less work your computer will have to do, and the more FPS you'll get. Obviously, you do not want to be playing on like 1080 by 1080 anymore since they changed the way stretched works. But if you're on a low-end PC, I definitely recommend trying out stretched and just seeing what kind of FPS boost you get. Some of the most popular stretch resolutions that pros are using right now are 1656 by 1080, 1728 by 1080, and 1800 by 1080. Liquid Poach, Liquid Chap, Phased Martos, Atlantis Lecce, and even Secret Mongrel are using stretch resolutions now, so it's definitely becoming more popular again. If you don't know exactly how or what has changed, then make sure you check out my recent video on the new stretch resolution because it's not the same as the old one. What is the same though is how you change your resolution. Go to the little Windows Cortana search in the bottom left of your desktop and type in %localappdata%. From there, click Fortnite game, saved, config, Windows client, and then right click on game user settings. Go down to properties, uncheck the read only box and hit apply. Right click on the game user settings file again, but this time hit edit and go up to the top left, hit edit again and replace. For the find what box, put 1920 and replace that with what res you want to play on. I've been enjoying 1656, so I would put that there and then replace all. Make sure you save the file, then go back and change the game user settings properties to read only. Otherwise, Fortnite will run at your default res and not at the stretch res that you want. We're not done yet. We also have to change our desktop resolutions. To do that, go and right click on your desktop, then go over to Nvidia control panel. Under the display tab on the left, click change resolution and the customize button. After that, hit create custom resolution and enter whatever res you want to play on. This has to be the same res as the one that you just put in for the game files. When you press the test button, it'll test it out and then go back to your native res. Make sure you choose the resolution you just entered under the custom resolutions and click apply to change your desktop res. If you do get black bars, you'll need to go under the display tab again and all the way down to adjust desktop size and position. Then make sure the scaling mode is on full screen so you won't get any black bars or input lag while playing. The last thing I wanted to mention was that if you don't like the way the new stretch res looks, you can still lower the amount of pixels on your screen while playing on a 16:9 aspect ratio. Just go into your settings and lower the resolution bar down from 1920 by 1080, which is the native resolution, and find whatever res you like that gives you the most FPS. A lot of pros play on 1600 by 900 and you still have the same amount of FOV you would get on 1920 by 1080. It's just way less pixels and therefore more FPS. Now let's talk about some in-game settings for both console and PC. The first and most important setting is the record replays button at the bottom of your second settings tab in your Fortnite settings. What it does is records each of your games so you can view them whenever you want in your replays. The problem is, for console and for low-end PCs, it can really affect your FPS. It even says when you hover over the option that recording replays can reduce performance and take up hard drive space. My advice for those of you looking to get a solid 10 to 20 FPS boost is to turn it off. The downside is of course that you won't be able to watch back your replays because they're not recording anymore. Let's be real though, how many of you guys actually use the replay system? And on top of that, I'd rather play at a stable 60 FPS on console than watch replays of me struggling on 30 FPS. That's just me, and I guess you guys will have to make that decision for yourself. But I highly recommend turning it off because it really does help your performance, especially on console and low-end PCs. The next option you should turn off is motion blur. Motion blur is enabled by default on console, but a season or two ago, Epic gave Xbox One X and PS4 Pros the option to turn it off. Motion blur is probably the most useless setting ever. Unless you like giving yourself motion sickness, it really is useless and ugly. Go in and check if you have the option and then turn it off as soon as possible. Your game will look nicer, it'll feel nicer, and you'll get more FPS. The final setting I recommend turning off is visual sound effects. I know I talked about it in my advanced settings video and I said it's actually kind of useful. Just like every other graphics setting on console and for low-end PCs, it will definitely hurt your FPS in the late game and during build fights. The more stuff you have going on in your game and on your screen, the harder your machine has to work. You basically want the bare minimum amount in terms of settings, and since console already has shadows and other stuff enabled by default, you really should be turning off all the stuff you have an option to use if you want better FPS. If you like playing with it on, then maybe you could try only using it in the early game because that's when I feel it's most useful. Even the best PCs in the world can barely get 100 FPS or more in a stacked endgame. With all those sounds and shooting icons on your screen from the visual sound effects, you're probably losing a solid 20 to 30 FPS minimum. Just do yourself a favor and turn it on. Trust me when I say FPS is more important here. Unless of course you're actually deaf or you have trouble hearing, then you should probably have it on. The last two tricks I want to cover are Nvidia and Windows settings. I've been using all of these for a long time and they've been a huge factor in helping me get good frames no matter what game I play. Go back to the Nvidia control panel for the first one, but this time go up to the 3D settings tab at the top left. Then go down and check the use my preference emphasizing option, but make sure it's on performance. This will change your 3D settings for you and will put performance over visuals. Kind of like in Fortnite how you can turn all your settings off or on low for the best FPS. This is the same thing but for your Nvidia 3D settings. The last one is in your Windows settings. Click on the little settings icon from the Windows and then hit System, Power and Sleep, and Additional Power Settings. By default it will be on balanced, but go ahead and change it to high performance like I have here. If you don't see it, just click the little Show Additional Plans drop down and it should be there. If you're struggling to get decent FPS, then I do recommend using all of these methods for the best results. You should definitely see a 40 to 50 FPS boost minimum, especially for those of you on lower end PCs. And for those of you on console, you can definitely expect to get more stable FPS. So if this video helped you guys out, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Thank you to everyone using code GeFortnite. Your support has been unreal recently, and I really hope you guys understand how thankful I am. So once again, thank you all. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.